July 4th, 1969, Vallejo, California. Just after midnight, two teenagers were sitting in a parked car near Blue Rock Springs Park. The night was quiet, until another car pulled into the lot behind them. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The driver stayed inside for a few seconds. Then he stepped out carrying a flashlight. For a moment, it looked like a routine police stop, but it wasn't. Without saying a word, the man raised a gun and opened fire. The first shots shattered the windows instantly. Then the attacker turned and walked back toward his car. For a moment it was over, but seconds later he came back and fired again. Less than an hour later, police received a phone call. The caller sounded calm, almost emotionless. He claimed responsibility for the attack, but investigators didn't yet realize this was only the beginning. Between December 1968 and October 1969, Northern California became the hunting ground of one of the most infamous unidentified killers in American history. At least 5 people were murdered and 2 others survived. The attacks stretched across multiple counties, involving different locations, different victims, and even different methods. At first, investigators didn't believe the cases were connected, but over time, something disturbing became impossible to ignore. The same person was responsible for all of it. Unlike most serial killers, the Zodiac didn't try to disappear. He wanted attention. After the attacks, he called the police himself. He mailed letters to local newspapers. He sent cryptogram and coded messages. And with every new communication, investigators noticed the same disturbing pattern. The murders weren't just acts of violence to him, they were performances. He even gave himself a name, the Zodiac. The confirmed victims were David Faraday, 17 years old, Betty Lou Jensen, 16, Darlene Farron, 22, Cecilia Shepard, 22, and Paul Stein, 29. 2 others survived, Mike Mageau and Brian Hartnell. Their testimonies would become critical pieces of one of the largest manhunts in California history. Every confirmed Zodiac attack happened within roughly 90 miles of the San Francisco Bay Area. That detail mattered. Investigators believed the killer almost certainly lived nearby. He knew the isolated roads. He understood police response times. And after every attack, he vanished before officers could close in. For more than 50 years, nobody has ever definitively identified him. December 20th, 1968, Lake Herman Road, a quiet 2-lane highway in rural Solano County. At the time, it was a popular place for young couples looking for privacy, far from houses, far from traffic, and far from anyone who might notice something was wrong. That night, 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen parked near a water pumping station shortly after 10 p.m. At some point later that evening, another vehicle arrived. A witness would later report seeing a second car in the area earlier that night. If that account was accurate, it raises a chilling possibility. The killer may have already been there, waiting, watching the area before the victims ever arrived. Then, at approximately 11:15 p.m., a passing driver came across the scene. David Faraday had been shot once in the head while still inside the car. Betty Lou Jensen had tried to run. She made it only 28 feet, before collapsing. She had been shot 5 times in the back. Investigators recovered several .22 caliber shell casings from the scene. But beyond that, there was very little evidence to work with. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, and no clear motive. In the early days of the investigation, Police treated the murders as an isolated incident, a tragic act of violence. Nothing more. They had no reason to believe the case was connected to anything larger, but that assumption wouldn't last for long. What happened on Lake Herman Road was not an ending. It was the beginning of something far more disturbing. 7 months later, the killer returned. July 4th, 1969. Blue Rock Springs Park, just a few miles from the first murders. At around 11 p.m., Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau parked in the lot. A short time later, another vehicle pulled in nearby. The driver remained there briefly, then left. At the time, it didn't seem important, but investigators would later realize it was one of the most significant details in the entire case. Because roughly 10 minutes later, the same vehicle returned. And just like the first attack, there are signs the killer may have been watching the couple before he struck. Studying the situation. Deciding whether to act. This wasn't impulsive violence. It was deliberate, calculated. The driver stepped out carrying a flashlight. At first, Mike Mageau believed he was looking at a police officer. Then, without saying a word, the man opened fire. Mike Mageau was struck multiple times. Darlene Ferrin was also hit repeatedly. The attacker then turned and walked back toward his vehicle. For a moment, it appeared the attack was over, but it wasn't. Moments later, he turned around, came back, and fired several more shots into the victim's car. That detail would leave a lasting impression on investigators. The attacker wasn't acting in panic, and he wasn't trying to escape. His actions suggested something far more disturbing. He wanted to make sure no one was left alive. Darlene Ferrin died shortly after arriving at the hospital. Mike Mageau survived, and in doing so became one of the very few people to see the Zodiac and live. At 12:40 in the morning, less than an hour after the shooting, a phone rang inside the Vallejo Police Department. The caller sounded calm, controlled, almost emotionless. He began with a simple statement, "I want to report a double murder." He then gave the exact location of the attack. He described the victims and identified the weapon that had been used. Then, without being prompted, he made another admission. He claimed responsibility for the murders on Lake Herman Road months earlier. And then he hung up. Officers quickly traced the call to a payphone just a few blocks from the police station. But when they arrived, the caller was already gone. There were no witnesses, no usable evidence, nothing that could identify who had made the call. Even so, that phone call changed the investigation completely. For the first time, investigators understood something important. They weren't dealing with a conventional killer. This was someone who wanted the police to know he existed. Someone who seemed to take satisfaction in creating fear. And with each attack, he appeared to be growing more confident. On August 1st, 1969, 3 newspapers received nearly identical letters. The San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each envelope contained a portion of a coded message. When the 3 sections were combined, they formed a 408-symbol cryptogram. The writer demanded that the newspapers publish the cipher on their front pages. If they refused, he threatened to kill again. The newspapers complied. Almost immediately, the cryptogram attracted national attention. Federal investigators examined it. Military codebreakers studied it. Professional cryptographers attempted to decipher it. But despite their efforts, none of them could solve it. Then, something unexpected happened. The cipher wasn't solved by the FBI or by military codebreakers. Instead, it was solved by a schoolteacher named Donald Hardin and his wife, Betty. Working from their living room, the couple managed to decipher the message that had baffled experts across the country. What they uncovered was deeply disturbing. The writer claimed he enjoyed killing people because it was, in his words, more fun than killing wild game in the forest. He described human beings as the most dangerous animal of all, and he claimed that his victims would become slaves in the afterlife. At the very bottom of the message, investigators found something new. For the first time, the writer signed a name, the Zodiac. But despite all the attention surrounding the cipher, investigators noticed something important. There was no personal information, no identity, no meaningful clues about who he was. The cipher wasn't a confession. It was a performance. A carefully constructed message designed to spread fear, while keeping investigators trapped in a psychological game. September 27, 1969, Lake Berryessa. This attack would be unlike anything investigators had seen before. That afternoon, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were relaxing near the lake when they noticed a man approaching. Slowly, deliberately. What happened next would become one of the most disturbing moments in the entire case. The man was wearing a black execution-style hood, dark sunglasses, and on the front of the hooded costume was a symbol investigators already recognized, the Zodiac symbol. It was the first and only confirmed time the killer openly identified himself during an attack. The man claimed he was an escaped convict. He said he needed money and a car. At first, the story may have sounded believable, but investigators later discovered something important. The man had arrived carrying pre-cut lengths of rope. The restraints weren't improvised. They had been prepared beforehand, which suggested the attack had been planned long before he ever approached the victims. After restraining the victims, the attacker carried out the assault. Brian Hartnell was wounded 6 times, Cecilia Shepard 10. What happened next would become one of the most unusual details in the entire case. The killer walked calmly to the victim's vehicle. Then, using a felt-tip pen, he wrote on the car door. He listed the dates of his previous attacks, almost as if he were keeping a record or claiming credit. To investigators, it looked less like a message and more like a signature. Hartnell survived the attack. Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later. Investigators did recover a partial palm print from the vehicle. For a moment, it appeared they finally had a promising lead, but once again, it led nowhere. The Zodiac had struck for the 4th confirmed time. And despite eyewitnesses, physical evidence, and a growing trail of clues, his identity remained a mystery. October 11, 1969, San Francisco. Once again, the Zodiac changed his approach. This time, the victim wasn't a young couple. It was a taxi driver, Paul Stein, 29 years old, a college student who drove a cab part-time to earn extra money. Shortly before 10 p.m., Stein picked up a passenger near Union Square. The destination was Presidio Heights, one of San Francisco's most affluent neighborhoods. When the cab reached its destination, the passenger suddenly produced a handgun. A single shot was fired. Paul Stein died inside his taxi, but what happened next would make this case even more extraordinary. 3 children watching from a nearby house witnessed the aftermath. From an upstairs window, they saw the killer inside the cab. They watched as he removed a piece of Paul Stein's shirt. Then he stepped away from the vehicle and calmly walked down the street. He didn't run, he didn't panic, he simply walked away. Police officers flooded the area within minutes. Roads were searched, patrol units moved through the neighborhood. And then, a devastating mistake changed everything. The initial police dispatch described the suspect as a black male, but the witnesses had actually reported seeing a white male. As officers searched the neighborhood, 2 patrolmen encountered a white man who reportedly matched the suspect's appearance. They spoke with him briefly, then allowed him to continue on his way, because he did not match the description they had been given. Only later did investigators realize the dispatch had contained a critical error. By then, the man was gone. If that individual was the Zodiac, police may have come closer to capturing him that night than at any other point in the investigation. More than 50 years later, it remains one of the most infamous missed opportunities in criminal history. As the Zodiac's notoriety grew, so did the fascination surrounding his coded messages. Among them was one cipher that became almost legendary, the so-called 340 cipher, named for its 340 symbols arranged across 17 rows. For decades it resisted every attempt to solve it. The FBI couldn't crack it. Professional cryptographers couldn't crack it. Mathematicians, military analysts, and thousands of amateur code breakers all tried and all failed, year after year, decade after decade. The cipher remained one of the most famous unsolved codes in the world. Then, in December 2020, something remarkable happened. 3 private citizens succeeded where generations of experts had failed: David Ornchak, Sam Blake, and Jarl van Eyck. Working together, they uncovered a complex transposition pattern hidden within the cipher. After more than 50 years, the message had finally been decoded. The FBI officially confirmed the solution just days later. After more than 50 years, the 340 cipher had finally been decoded. It was chillingly familiar. I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me. Even after half a century, the Zodiac was still doing exactly what he had always done: taunting investigators, manipulating attention, controlling the narrative. And despite all the effort required to solve the cipher, the result was ultimately frustrating. There was no name, no identity, no revelation that could finally solve the case. The message offered no definitive clue as to who the Zodiac really was. To this day, 2 additional Zodiac ciphers remain unsolved. Some researchers believe one of them could contain his real name. Others remain skeptical. So far, no evidence has ever confirmed that theory. More than 50 years after the killings began, some of the Zodiac's secrets remain locked away. Over the years, investigators examined dozens of potential suspects. Most were eventually ruled out, but one name remained at the center of the investigation longer than any other: Arthur Lee Allen. Allen lived in Vallejo, just a short distance from several locations connected to the Zodiac case. He had previously worked as a schoolteacher, but later lost his teaching credentials following allegations involving inappropriate behavior with minors. As investigators dug deeper into Allen's background, they began finding details that appeared difficult to ignore. Then, in 1971, a man named Don Cheney came forward with a remarkable story. Cheney claimed Allen had once spoken about wanting to hunt people. He also alleged that Allen discussed using the name Zodiac, and claimed that Allen had described sending coded messages to police. If Cheney's account was accurate, it would represent one of the most significant leads in the entire investigation. But as with so much of the Zodiac case, proving those claims would be far more complicated. Investigators uncovered other details that seemed to point toward Arthur Lee Allen. One of the most widely discussed involved a wristwatch. Allen owned a Zodiac brand watch. Its logo featured a crossed circle symbol strikingly similar to the one used in the killer's letters. The discovery attracted enormous attention. To many observers, it appeared more than a coincidence. But investigators needed evidence, not speculation. Over the years, police conducted multiple searches of Allen's property. They recovered knives, weapons, and other items that some investigators believed resembled details mentioned in Zodiac correspondence. Piece by piece, the case against Allen appeared to grow stronger. Yet every time investigators came close to a breakthrough, they encountered the same problem. The evidence never became conclusive. Fingerprints recovered from Zodiac-related evidence did not match Allen. DNA comparisons failed to identify him as the killer, and handwriting experts remained divided. Some believed there were similarities. Others disagreed. After years of investigation, the case remained unresolved. Then, in 1992, Arthur Lee Allen died. He was never charged with the Zodiac murders, never arrested, and never officially identified as the Zodiac Killer. If Allen was responsible, he carried the truth to the grave. And if he wasn't, investigators were forced to confront an even more troubling possibility. They had spent years pursuing the wrong man. More than 50 years later, one question still remains. How did the Zodiac escape capture? The answer isn't simple, because investigators weren't facing a single obstacle. They were facing several at the same time. First, there was the problem of jurisdiction. The attacks occurred across multiple counties and police departments. In the late 1960s, communication between agencies was far slower and far less coordinated than it is today. Critical information could be delayed, miscommunicated, or sometimes missed altogether. Then there were the technological limitations of the era. Modern DNA analysis didn't exist. Fingerprint comparisons had to be performed manually. National digital databases were still decades away. Evidence that might be tested in hours today often required months of work, or couldn't be analyzed at all. But the challenges didn't end there. The Zodiac appeared to understand how investigations operated. He used payphones, chose isolated locations, spent very little time at crime scenes, and repeatedly manipulated media attention to his advantage. Every letter demanded a response. Every cipher consumed investigative resources. Every threat forced police to divide their attention. In many ways, the Zodiac wasn't simply committing murders. He was managing the investigation from a distance, directing attention, creating confusion, and controlling fear. That may have been his greatest weapon, because for decades investigators chased clues, suspects, letters, and codes. Yet the man behind them all remained unidentified, and for more than half a century, the mystery endured. Today, the Zodiac case officially remains open, and despite more than half a century of investigation, the possibility of an answer still exists. Advances in genetic genealogy, the same technology that helped identify the Golden State Killer, have renewed interest in the case. Investigators continue to examine potential DNA evidence recovered from Zodiac correspondence. The challenge is determining whether those samples are complete and reliable enough to produce a definitive result. For the families of the victims, that answer has never stopped mattering. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, Paul Stein. 5 people whose lives became part of one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history. And even now, the story may not be over. Somewhere within decades of evidence files, investigative reports, forensic records, or unsolved ciphers, there may still be a missing piece, a detail that was overlooked, a connection nobody recognized, a clue waiting for technology to catch up. Because unlike the Zodiac, evidence doesn't forget. And until a definitive answer is found, one question continues to haunt investigators, researchers, and the public alike. Who was the Zodiac Killer? More than 50 years later, we still don't know.